Good people don't smoke marijuana.
I've known Larry for a long time.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
This is the Medical Marijuana Radio Show with Larry Love. All love. I got something here for you and me. Oh yeah, it's the medical marijuana. Whoa, whoa, I got something here for you and me. Oh yeah, it's the medical marijuana. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Medical Marijuana Radio. This one is for Saturday, the 24th of April, 2021. I'm your host, Larry Love, and we're here every week to bring you the latest information on the fight for the medical use of cannabis and for the fight to have adult recreational cannabis as well. And it has to be done in a smart way in order to save and just keep our medical program going. Because if it wasn't for medical cannabis, we wouldn't be as far as we are today with recreational cannabis in so many different states, almost federally, and we're hoping that's going to happen as well. This week we have Michael Krawitz. Michael is our go-to guy. He travels all over the world to fight against the drug war, to fight for veterans' rights. He's a veteran himself. Veterans' rights to use cannabis as their medicine and not be penalized in any way by the VA. And so Michael is going to be with us in just a couple of minutes here. Looking around, again, we've got a lot of new states coming aboard with recreational cannabis, adult use cannabis. And I hope that while they're writing their rules, that the advocates will be there and hopefully pushing for certain things that need to be done. So we'll be right back with Michael Krawitz right after this.
This is the Medical Marijuana Radio Show with Larry Love. All love.
And today we have Michael Krawitz, who's going to tell us about everything that's been going on in the last year with the World Health Organization and treaties that have been going on internationally. And he is the executive director of Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access. Michael, welcome.
Thanks, man. It's great to be here.
So it's been a year since we talked online here, in our show. So what's been going on, and what's the most exciting thing that's happened recently? And then we'll go back and figure out what's going on before that.
Yeah, it's been, I don't even know the words to describe it, a whirlwind, an absolute cascade. Last year, I came home from the international meetings in March this year, last year. Everything's a blur.
It's confusing. The pandemic has thrown a wrench into all this stuff. I mean, normally you would be flying to Europe,
right,
and places, and now you're doing it virtually. So I'm sure, was it easier or harder to do it this way?
Virtual is a double-edged sword. It provides for a certain level of communication that is even difficult to achieve in person. But on the other side, if you aren't in the loop, it's really difficult to get in the loop. It's very cryptic, the whole virtual space, as far as knowing where the meetings are and joining the meetings and everything. It's really been difficult. This week, we had the international meetings of the United Nations Drug Control Program. They're called the Commission on Narcotic Drugs. It's a big pomp and circumstance meeting where member states, countries, in other words, get together and talk about drug policy once a year, pass resolutions, do minor things. Every 10 years or so, they do something major. And then in between, they seem to, sort of do minor things each year in slowly moving the boulder of drug policy along. And we joined virtually. We had about 10 or 15 people, a lot of military veterans as part of this new Veterans Action Council that I'm part of, and connecting with our good friends Farid and Kenzie from Paris and Barcelona, respectively, and Amy down in Mexico. It was really neat to have everybody in one Zoom room, but from all over the world, joining these meetings. But the big meeting came up in December of last year, and that was the final vote that we got on these recommendations that we got out of the World Health Organization. And you'll remember years ago already, I was talking about the work we were doing in Geneva, trying to make sure that the World Health Organization had access to all the knowledge base that we have and all the information, so-called anecdotal information and scientific data and everything that we have, just to make sure that as they were going to make a decision, they'd have everything we knew. We trusted them to make a knowledgeable, evidence-based decision if they had the evidence in hand. It was just our job to make sure they knew what we knew, and they did. I think it did a really good job. They put forth a pretty sort of ambitious set of recommendations, and the most bold of all the recommendations was accepted: rescheduling of cannabis under the treaty to basically streamline cannabis as a medicine and accept its medical value. It's no longer, as the New York Times put it, it's no longer on their list of most dangerous drugs. And I think that pretty well explains what we did. But that change was signed by the head of the United Nations, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and sent out to the countries the end of January. And as we understand it, there'll be like a 3-month window where countries could ask questions or appeal it or whatever before it finally is considered a change in international treaty. That's the way we understand it. So that puts us right now, literally as we're speaking, the ink is drying on a change in the international treaty that, for one thing, will no longer allow our DEA to prevent us from rescheduling inside the USA.
Well, that is major, because rescheduling is actually going to allow everybody to do the business in a proper manner, of course. So, what should the United States is it reschedule or dropping it from the schedule? What should be done? What do you think should be the way is handled?
Well, I mean, it's the reality is that both are happening at once. So inside the United States Congress, we've got bills now that are being put forward. I mean, we're going to be more than likely relatively soon seeing a bill sent over to President Biden to sign that will deschedule cannabis federally. It will completely remove cannabis from federal scheduling control under our Controlled Substances Act. That bill, as I've read the various drafts, doesn't even consider the treaties. And that's okay. I mean, under federal law, under US constitutional law, the Congress can actually pass a bill and send it over to the president to get signed into law that actually, quote unquote, violates the treaty, straight on violates the treaty. There's nothing in the treaty underneath our US Constitution that would prevent us from doing that. But it does raise some interesting questions. What are we going to do with regard to our international obligations? What are we going to say to other countries? How are we going to really champion reform at the international level? Is the United States going to be the leader of international drug policy reform inside the drug control program? That's what I'd like to see. Speaking candidly about the change in the international law that we just received, it doesn't support an administrative descheduling. I wish it did. I wish I could say that we changed the treaty and we removed it from all the schedules in the treaty, but we didn't. It's still controlled under the treaty, and they have a very valid argument to say that it should still be regulated under our schedules, given our treaty obligation.
What is that?
The reason why it's important, I just want to finish this up before you continue, just to lock it all into a bubble.
Right.
It's our Controlled Substances Act that makes that so. I just want to make that clear to everybody. It's how our Controlled Substances Act is written right now. Up until we amend it, it's written the way it is right now, and it defers to the treaty. So as long as that situation is the way it is, the administration, the Biden administration, can reschedule, and this treaty change will allow a much more, leeway. Maybe we can have 3, 4, or 5 as a schedule for cannabis. But like I said, the change in the treaty itself does not give the president the authority to deschedule. The Congress can.
Okay, that I understand, but whether he signs it or not is something else, because he's been very vocal and he's had some actions recently. He's still a denier, I think, of it being medical. You would think that with his background with the cancers in his family and people passing away, that he would embrace it more, the science about this. But he also let some people go that had past use of cannabis, and there's been a lot of talk on Clubhouse and other places about Kamala and trying to get in, being in his ear, but she also has a bad past. So if he thinks that it's still a gateway drug, which he said he has, how do we convince him? How do we tell him that this has to happen regardless of his personal feelings?
I think that the cannabis movement needs to tread very lightly here and be very careful. I just had a meeting with the full group of the DCMJ up there in Washington, D.C., and said the same thing to them, that I think it's too early to protest, that anything that we would protest now would be 90% his past, and that could prevent him. We could actually put in place the very obstacle that we need to remove by doing that. And I'll give you a perfect example. Years ago, National Normal, National Organization for Reform of Marijuana Laws, for those that aren't following along with the headlines, because they get a lot of headlines. They're sort of our press contact for the cannabis movement. I mean, really, Normal's office phone rings 24 hours a day with people trying to either figure out a drug test or get out of jail, get out of drug charges, or media questions. But anyway, Normal decided to out Mayor Bloomberg of New York because Mayor Bloomberg wouldn't play ball with them. They asked Mayor Bloomberg to do some radical marijuana reforms. He said no, wouldn't even talk to him about it. So they decided to just attack him. And they, quote, outed Mayor Bloomberg. And they put billboards around New York City that talked about his college marijuana use and stuff. And what happened? He doubled down. And after that, we had the worst marijuana arrest record of all time. And that,
The stop and frisk thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stop and frisk thing.
Also, let me interrupt because we're talking about Bloomberg. I want you to.
No,
so he also said that medical marijuana is the biggest hoax in our time. That's
Biden.
No. Bloomberg.
Oh, that was Mayor Bloomberg.
Bloomberg actually.
Yeah, but follow me here. It isn't Mayor Bloomberg's, the actions of Mayor Bloomberg and whether it's right or wrong that I'm talking about. It's our actions as a movement and whether they cause more harm than good.
Okay.
And by outing Mayor Bloomberg, it put the mayor in a position where he literally doubled down. And instead of giving him, it's like art of war stuff, where you give your enemy room to exit the battlefield gracefully. That's not for nothing that they say that. You do that so that you don't wind up making the situation worse than it really is. So anyway, back to Biden. He said when he was getting ready to go into office, and he didn't need to, that he wanted to reschedule cannabis so that we could allow research and allow for medical use. He already said that. And Schedule 2 would be the obvious rescheduling. We don't like that. We don't want that. And the change that we just had internationally will pretty much prevent his administration from rescheduling to 2. It's almost impossible to reschedule 2 given the change at the treaty level. It's a bold change that's associated with a major shift in position of the World Health Organization, the International Narcotics Control Board, and 50 countries around the world are working on medical programs for cannabis. This is the cat's out of the bag on medical cannabis. Schedule 2, especially given 16 states, of which we'll talk about that later, of which I'm sitting in one, the most recent, the first southern state to legalize.
That's big.
Regulated adult access, which, having that in line as Schedule 2, and that would be ridiculous. That would be an extreme juxtaposition to have a federal position of Schedule 2 and yet have it regulated at the states as a over-the-counter substance in the way we do it. So anyway, I think that President Biden needs to be given a chance to do the right thing here. We need to do everything that we can to put him in a position to do the right thing. And when I say do the right thing, there's 2 things I'm talking about. One is signing the bill into law that we send to him from the Congress. It's going to be a democratically backed bill that's going to be pushed by 65% of the American people. I think it's 65% now want this, of the American people. And his own vice president. If he doesn't sign that, and if he doesn't allow the administration, because this is the attorney general that will be working on this rescheduling from the treaty stuff. So if he doesn't allow the attorney general or somehow interferes with the attorney general's process or gives us trouble when we argue that we don't want Schedule 2, we want at least Schedule 3, 4, or 5 out of this rescheduling, administrative rescheduling, those 2 things, either one of those, then you attack him. Then you have political reason to take him to task. And go at it. I mean, take them to the newspapers. We'll have protests in the streets. I mean, DCMJ is ready to pull out their 80-foot joint and start, parading it in front of the Capitol again.
Where do they store that?
Yeah, secret.
They roll a new one each time they bring it out, I hope. So with
Yeah, you gotta keep them fresh.
yeah, so with the timeline that we're currently on, what is your guess that they're going to start, looking at that, Biden and the administration? What is your guess? I mean, time goes by fast.
I'm getting the feeling from the administration that they're, it reminds me of like a good sized pond or a small lake that's completely empty, and you're trying to fill it, and the first water that you put in just disappears. It's like, if you're trying to fill a lake, where do you put the water? They're really trying to do a lot. The United States federal government, especially the State Department, there's all these jobs that need to be filled, and a lot of them need to have. I mean, they just now are in the process of trying to seat someone over the White House Office on National Drug Control Policy. They got an acting director, and they just now, a few weeks ago, finally got an attorney general. We actually got an attorney general. It looks like, from the looks of it, a decent one, one that'll actually follow the law. So
that would definitely be nice if somebody would follow the law and be sort of neutral and do the right thing, of course. So so at the same time that you're advocating for cannabis, what about psilocybin and some of these psychedelics that seem to help PTSD and so forth for veterans? Is that something that you're working on, or others?
Others, but the Veterans Action Council that I was talking about, we have a lot of interest in that. We've gotten a lot of reports from people who had trouble with the administration of some of these psychedelics, that they weren't administered in a way that was done professionally. There's been some sexual assaults while under the influence and stuff like that have been talked about around the internet, and we've gotten some reports back of different kinds of problems, with these, trips and tracks to use different hallucinogens for medical and spiritual awakenings and stuff like that. So we're working now with like MAPS and anybody that really is professionally involved in psychedelics research and science, to try to present at least a working draft of operational guidance, sort of standard operating procedures for such an entity that wants to administer these strong psychedelics.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, we've found, and the reason why we're so interested in working on it is because we've found great promise. And the way Rick Doblin explained it to me led me to believe that in the future you'll have a little clinic that you can go to for like post-traumatic stress, for example, where you can use, under a very strong clinical guidance, MDMA, psilocybin, things like that, that will actually produce in some patients such a reduction in symptoms that they won't even really be able to be registered as having post-traumatic stress anymore. In other words, a cure, essentially. I see that with those that wouldn't be able to just put aside all their issues with such intense, guided psychedelics therapy, that cannabis would then be the really, one of the frontline take-home medicines. So I still work on cannabis, but I see its role though. Cannabis is a palliative. Cannabis is a symptom reducer. We don't talk about cannabis in terms of cure. I mean, there's very good promise for cannabinoids to cure cancers and stuff, but that science is still, new, and patients that are using very strong Rick Simpson's oil and stuff like that are doing their best to try to take advantage of it now. But anybody that would be using it for that would admit they'd rather have it be more focused if they could know more about how it worked and everything.
So
So that's where we're at,
let me ask you this. You're fighting, the use of medical cannabis is and the acceptance of that is why we're able to have adult use cannabis in 18 states now, 16, then
Yep.
New York and New Mexico, so we're up to 18. So how do we protect the natural plant as medicine from going to pharmaceutical? Like, how do we campaign that this is a botanical medicine and that the whole plant is what's needed that really works best? I mean, otherwise, pharmaceuticals are just going to, a couple of years are going to take it over. But I think there'll always be a niche industry if they'll allow that.
I would rephrase your question completely.
Please do.
The truth of it is that we're fighting for acceptance of and understanding of cultural, expressions and tribal traditions and things that have been passed down within our cannabis culture for generations, that we got from traditional healers and folks out in the rainforests and in the traditional growing places of cannabis along the equator, that we evolved and adapted what it's called as traditional medicine. If like India has been doing it for 5,000 years, whatever, it's their traditional medicine. We take that to California and adapt it to California. It becomes complementary medicine. That's where traditional and complementary medicine, what that means and how that works. So we've been actually practicing contemporary complementary use of traditional use of cannabis medicine all along. And the big fight is, how do you present that to the broader public? And that's always been our challenge. It's always been our fight. We've always been marginalized. We've had a lot of fights over how herbs are treated and herbal medicines are handled. We've had a fight with the FDA a lot about that. And that's the fight cannabis is really in and should be in and part of. They're sort of the big boxer that's not been allowed to fight in that ring. But that's where cannabis belongs as an herbal medicine. Pharmaceuticals are pharmaceuticals. There's nothing holding them back. Nothing ever been holding them back. We're not in their way, and we're not against them, and they're not against us. Generally, they're not against us. The big pharmaceutical industries have been dumping huge amounts of money for the past 15 years into cannabinoid research. We don't know anything about it. Nobody from our medical cannabis movement routinely, attends ICRS meetings. That's the International Cannabinoid Research Society meetings. I say nobody with a wink because there's a handful of us, obviously, or I wouldn't know about it. But the thing is that we are operating in a very big space, and we're trying to create a way for cannabis patients to have access to a antique Chinese apothecary method where the person has 1,000 little drawers and knows where every little herb and every one of those drawers was grown, has the history and story of every patient that ever came in and bought something from that drawer to compare to, and knows everything about your anatomy and your family history to draw from. They don't even do that much anymore in China. I mean, we're really, we're trying to protect something that is a endangered species in our world. Sure. And that's, really where we're at. So, and if you want to talk a little bit about those appellations, I'll just give you a hint. That's one of the bridges that I hope will bridge us from cannabis as an herbal medicine to allow for some of those preparations like you see in a very good dispensary to actually become accepted, standardized, FDA approved medicines in the pharmacy. Why not?
Explain what appellation is, okay, so that people understand what that term means in regards to this.
Sure. So appellations are an old word. People will recognize, French appellations on cheese and wine, the whole story of champagne, how champagne's actually a place in France and not just a kind of wine. And the whole thing revolves around a couple of important concepts. One, that the place has some kind of value in the product. That, in other words, growing grapes in France produces an end product that's distinctly different than growing the grapes in California and producing that product. And the rivalry between California and France has been really sweet. I get a kick out of it. And that's healthy. I think that's really good, healthy rivalry, that you want to produce the best from your region and compare it to other regions around the world. And that specialness, that special character of a product from a particular place, grown in a particular way, with particular kind of care and culture of understanding of the knowledge and everything that goes into those cultivation practices, all as a package, is what you call an appellation. And the good thing about it, from what I was just talking about a minute ago, is to prove an appellation. In other words, to get a license to be protected under an appellation, you have to show Well, first of all, it has to be something that has a value to the consumer. I mean, I'll say that first because the whole thing hinges on that. The whole appellation thing, if it's not of value to the consumer, if the consumer doesn't think it's special, it's not special. That's the end thing there. So you have to have, like, reputation, that you've already engaged the consumer in and know that this is special, and worth protecting is sort of your baseline. But then it has to be reproducible. You have to be able to prove that there's something special about it. You have to show that, cannabis grown right near the ocean in California in the mountains is different than the cannabis grown inland, or that it's grown up in
Right.
the far mountains of Humboldt County and Mendocino County is different than if you grow it in the Napa Valley, or if you grow it especially anywhere on earth under lights, for example. So I think that specialness, that uniqueness is the part of it, but it's the reproducible and the provable part that I like to help us start bridging that gap to getting cannabis into the FDA process.
And if it's medical, it should be in the FDA process, right? Or even adult use, should that be part of the FDA?
Well, I mean, this is one of those things that is kind of a choice, I think, for the producer, how they want to engage this, whether they want to sell it as a produce item, an herbal medicine, or try to engage the process. The process is going to be rather rigorous to get a product through the FDA, and onto the shelf, even when they're treating us fairly in the end. When we finally get all the federal law out of the way and everything, it's still going to be a rather rigorous, difficult process, especially because, and this is again that big fight, the whole world, all the governments, not just the UN or the federal government, but all the governments and all the powerful structures of our world look at medicine as like a magic pill. That's this single thing that's completely understood, that just goes into your body and cures something. Well, first of all, most medicines don't cure things. And the second thing is, we know very little about, in the end, the science of a lot of the drugs we take. The drugs that go through the FDA process are often, conducted under very limited trials, very, very expensive, but very limited trials. The companies can often cherry pick what data they want to show the FDA and not even show them contradictory science that's blown up in our face recently, with deadly drug interactions and stuff like that. So they want, a cannabinoid that does this or that, or, 3 cannabinoids combined that this or that. And I think we might actually get to that someday.
There's no doubt.
Really break down all the terpenes and break down all the cannabinoids. Think about it. You're talking about a 26th order equation, something like that. If you were just talking about 2 cannabinoids, that's easy, or 3 cannabinoids. But then when you add in the, rest of the cannabinoids, you get maybe 8 or 10. Then you add the
Terpenes?
terpenes. Yeah, you add in the terpenes, and you got 26 or 30 something terpenes, which fundamentally change the therapeutic value of the end product.
That
And changes
contrast
taste,
effect where they work
character,
together.
everything. What we perceive as really good cannabis, what we love that tastes really great, everything is that complex mix of all these things. To do that ourselves, like I said, you're getting up into very, very high order equations, which will take, maybe hundreds of years to reverse engineer how that works for science. Right now, we can take advantage of that plant material, and as it becomes, more regulated and less prohibited, we need to picture how we want to do that. I think that, cannabis products that are generally available, that are just healthfully produced and sold with no general, just as general health aids, not as some particular treatment. That's an herb. That's an herbal medicine. You put it in the herbal medicine store and you sell it with the same control that you have on ginkgo biloba or whatever. But when you start making a medical claim, that's where you get into the FDA's turf. If you say it treats post-traumatic stress, for example, we were just talking about that, to be able to make that claim, you're going to have to go through that process. That's the hard wall that you're going to hit.
Well, that's why CBD right now is still sort of in conflict, or actually Delta 8, which is part of the hemp plant, seems to be a questionable thing right now. And now there's a Delta 10 that is very small in quantity, but it could be 30 to 60 times stronger than THC. And then, of course, the other cannabinoids, CBN, which THC deteriorates into, and THCV, which could be a very important in CBG. All these are cannabinoids that do something very good. Like I think THCV is good for the heart, and CBGs. I mean, there's lots of when you come not when you come to when you extract it and make it stronger, is what's going to happen, I think, with different kinds of dosing in the future to pinpoint different types of afflictions that people are going through.
Well, the key thing and the exciting thing there is that it's not just that you're extracting the stuff out, it's that normally if you had the plant material and you were just consuming it by smoking it or vaporizing it or making brownies or whatever, you're going to get such a tiny, minute amount of CBG or THCV or any of these compounds. Yeah. Very tiny compound, amounts in the plant material. So if you extract 5 acres of it and you take all of it and then, pull it out, then you could actually start having vape pens filled with Delta 8. And that's what you're talking about. And that presents all new kinds of issues. I mean, it's really good. It's fantastic. We have all kinds of potential, but it also creates the need for caution. And for, we know THC. We've used THC. We're comfortable with THC. We don't even really have that much information about CBD. Not yet. It's fairly new to us as a movement, as a culture, experimenting with CBD. Talking about CBG, THCV, CBDN, and all this is all brand new. That in these concentrations we never toyed with. And then it reminds me of the synthetic copies. And this brings me back to Vienna. So just go with me for a second here. You get these drug warriors that complain about us. And what they complain about is their own results, their own consequences. So 2 of them right off, right? They complained about environmental damage from indoor growing and of marijuana. Indoor growing of marijuana is absolutely a byproduct of prohibition. We wouldn't be growing marijuana indoors if they had full license to grow cannabis out there on the equator in those places that used to be imperially controlled colonial places that are still under the thumb of the US drug war, not allowed to grow cannabis. You know what I'm saying? Number 2, synthetic cannabinoids. Off the charts, bath salts, crap, make you lose your mind, stuff that should never be sold anywhere under any circumstance, only to be used in science, novel cannabinoids, stuff you come up with in a laboratory, keep it in the laboratory. That's every cannabis consumer out there saying that. Why do we use it? Why do we buy it? Because cannabis is illegal. They make cannabis illegal. I came up with this analogy the other night. I was saying, it would just be like they were saying alcohol causes blindness. Alcohol causes blindness. Never mind, it's not true. They could say it enough that they actually prohibit alcohol. They'd make it true. Because once you prohibit alcohol and you start making it in your bathtub and people are making it in old car radiators, people start going blind. You will never, ever see someone go blind for drinking beer, going to the liquor store, or going to a bar. But the minute you make it illegal, you'll hear about people going blind from alcohol. And that's exactly the same thing. Oh, marijuana makes you go blind. Yeah.
Not only that, other things they say makes you go blind too, but we're still here. Anyway.
Touche.
So let me ask you something. You've been, fighting for the good cause for all these years, and I guess in the last few days or a week, a gentleman named Steve Fox passed away. Did you know him? Can you tell us about him a little bit? Because I'm not. I've heard of him, but I'd like to maybe honor him and maybe say something about him today, if you would.
Steve, I work pretty closely with him these days. He was very active in national policy, looking into the, kind of the way that we handle the very thing that we were just talking about, the bills that are going to come out of Congress that will actually create adult regulated markets across the United States and end United States marijuana prohibition. He was right in the middle of that loop. And I worked with him years ago. He was a very, very important person to the veterans stuff that we did that most people don't know anything about. So I'd love to tell you the story. He got in the middle of this conversation that we were having where I had gotten, if you remember the whole story with the VA marijuana policy, I had gotten a letter from the Undersecretary of Health that said that you shouldn't worry about drug testing or anything if you were following the law of the state and using the cannabis appropriately under the state guidance with a doctor's recommendation, that it should be treated like any other medicine. Mm-hmm. And that letter was so revolutionary, it almost became like proxy policy, VA policy. And the way it did was through Steve. Steve, actually, I'd been working with him off and on in Colorado over the years, and we had actually worked again off and on throughout the entire process of, I think, 7-year battle to add post-traumatic stress as a qualifying condition under Colorado state law. Ironic, given we legalized marijuana, had medical marijuana, and still couldn't add post-traumatic stress as a qualifying condition in Colorado. And it was right next door in New Mexico. It was not only allowed to be used as a qualifying condition, but it was very successful. And he got a New York Times writer that was very interested in writing a story about that. He was trying to put it on he had aspirations, if you will, to be on the front page of the New York Times. And I guess the New York Times front page cover editor said, no, that story about New Mexico and Colorado and post-traumatic stress, it was too local. It wasn't national enough. Mm-hmm. And this story I had about this undersecretary letter and this proxy VA policy, that was pretty national. And he went to the editors with it and they accepted it. And that became above the fold front page cover article. And it was the New York Times editorial board. And check this out. They have a different editorial board for above the fold on the front page and below the fold on the front page. So the editorial board for above the fold is in contact with me and the VA, and they come back to me and they say, hey, the VA would like a week or so to promote a VA policy on this rather than having your letter be proxy policy in this article. Is that okay with you? And I was laughing. I was like, yeah, absolutely. I love it. I'll wait. And that's where the VA policy was born. They might have put out a VA policy, but it wouldn't have been in that 4-year term of Obama. It would probably have been in the president's next term. And that was what we were expecting. And we weren't going to wait for it. We pressured them. And the New York Times front page and Steve Fox and his buddy that wrote at the New York Times were very much all puzzle pieces that were irreplaceable to that result. So everybody that, the tens of thousands of military veterans out there that use medical cannabis and feel protected, emboldened to start veteran service organizations on cannabis and grow cannabis and grow hemp and everything, all as a result of that VA policy, thanks, a debt of gratitude to Steve, especially those in Colorado.
Right. Well, thank you for telling us about him. Anything else you'd like to mention about Steve Fox?
Just that we miss him.
Yeah.
Miss him.
Absolutely.
It's a shock.
So, and speaking of, veterans and in cannabis, okay, there's and PTSD, which is huge. Almost everybody comes out of the service with that when they're in action and so forth. The conflict of being a medical cannabis patient and having a firearm, and I'm sure most veterans who know how to use firearms and are trained to and all that, I'm sure they want to keep them in their home for protection and so forth. So how are we going to deal with that? When can that change, where there's no conflict between being in a medical cannabis program or now even that we have adult use? How are they going to handle that, registering a firearm or having a firearm?
There's always been a debate as to whether using marijuana legally under a state law, registered under a state ID card, and using it under doctor's orders actually satisfied what the United States Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF, calls in their application for firearm, addicted to or abusing an illegal drug. It's technically illegal under federal law, and from the ATS perspective, you're supposed to check that you're a drug abuser if you use marijuana. But I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that it's not legal. Mm-hmm. It's legal if you can't be arrested. Can you be arrested for using medical marijuana in New Mexico if you're following the guidance of the law? Can you?
Probably,
especially from the federal government. I'm asking this really fairly. I don't think you can. I think it would be outside of your ability to be arrested by a federal agent for simply using marijuana pursuant to a state medical marijuana program if you're following all the rules. And if you can't be arrested, it's not illegal.
So I'm wondering if you got stopped and you had cannabis on you and you showed your medical cannabis card, and but then they found a gun in your trunk or something, that I still think that would cause a problem currently. But what we said earlier, Michael, one second, what we said earlier about changing of the schedule, I guess that is going to be the remedy?
Well, anything that pulls cannabis out of technically being illegal will will at least provide a path for those to be able to own a gun and not have to worry about this at all. But having said that, getting back to the initial point, there are cases working their ways through the courts. I haven't been following them very closely the last couple of years. They sort of went quiet, but we had a case in Oregon that we were following very, very closely for a long time, and that one died. But there are a couple other cases that still will wind up. I'm fairly sure if we don't change the federal law soon, then we'll wind up at the Supreme Court with a case, because there's a conflicting issue here that's right in the middle and relevant to the federal Supreme Court, and that is your constitutional right to bear arms. There was a constitutional ruling not that many years ago where they clarified that you actually have an individual right to bear arms. They were arguing back then that you only had a right to bear arms if you were part of a local militia or whatever, because of the way the Constitution is written. And no, they clarified it that you actually have an individual right to bear arms under the Constitution. So using cannabis, especially pursuant to doctors' medical orders, legal under state law, to take away someone's constitutional right based on that is a very high bar. I mean, they can do that. You can do that. You can put someone in prison. That's, robbing them of their constitutional rights. And that's provided for in our Constitution because the overwhelming need to protect the public from you outweighs your right to be free. So I think that's the weight here. And the way I testified in Virginia, they had a bill years ago that tried to remove the right to bear arms from people that use marijuana straight up by state law. And I argued with them, and I said, I actually used their own kung fu against them. I quoted quotes from the drug warriors back in the 70s that said that marijuana was a communist plant and it was here to make us all pacifists so that we wouldn't take up arms against our government. It was a communist trying to take us over. And I said, if you're going to take away gun rights from people, don't start with the pacifists. That's probably a mistake.
They're not going to have the guns, those people, for sure. Most likely.
It's not really your problem area of society. So anyway, I think that's the situation. And just to add one last little thought about this, it really strikes me personally as a military veteran. And I think that I'm pretty in tune with our cannabis movement, and we don't like guns. We generally do not like guns. We're anti-gun as a movement. And that's a problem for me as a military veteran, as a gun owner, as a, someone that believes in the Constitution, doesn't agree with the ATF's position, et cetera. We need to have representation within our movement of those who have the right to bear arms and need to be able to fight for that. And we need to be able to do that effectively. We might wind up doing that as a veteran stakeholder group, carrying that for the movement and just sort of championing that, because we like guns and we respect guns and we know how to use them without hurting people that we don't want to hurt, that we're not supposed to hurt.
Right.
That was the whole point of being in the military. You hurt the right people.
So
yeah.
Let me ask you this. So we're talking about Virginia and just now. So let's talk about their legalization of cannabis for adult use. I'm a little unclear. Did you already have a medical program that was active and flourishing?
In Virginia?
Yeah.
Yeah. Virginia has a crazy history with medical marijuana. We had a 1978 law that Bob Randall helped pass that only allowed it for cancer or glaucoma.
Right.
But it called for a prescription. Now, even though it's a state law and the prescription whole thing is a DEA issue, it's not really a state issue. It really prevented us from ever effectively using that medical marijuana law, And we had a new medical marijuana law that was passed in the whole craze of CBD. You don't want to call it like a pure CBD law, but it's predominantly CBD. It allows up to like 5% THC. And they expanded that quite a bit in the last year or so. So we have an active medical marijuana law, but it's limited. And there's only like a couple of stores in the whole state that actually carry those products, that are allowed for under that law.
Right. So before we move on to the recreational bill that you guys passed, what do you think about the states that are like medical states actually, and legal adult use states that want to limit the THC in cannabis? They want to keep it down below 10% or whatever, sometimes 8 and 7. I mean, Florida is one of these states. They tried it in this year in Colorado, but that went down in flames. So is it just the 3 martini lunch Republicans that are trying to do that to us?
There's two issues there. One is the issue of protecting medical marijuana in the wake of legalization, which is a very real, very serious battle that we're going to have to fight to maintain medical access for patients that need it, poor people, whatever, as we regulate adult access and create expensive stores that sell regulated cannabis products. The second issue is the my brain. Help me out here.
All right, the first issue, yeah, go ahead, and then the second issue. There's two issues here. So there's one and two. So if it's not the first thing, then it's going to be the second thing.
I love you, man. Yeah. So what we were talking about was it escapes me, man. I'll tell you what, man. I am tired. This has been a hard
Well,
week.
we were talking about
United Nations.
we were talking about reducing the THC percentages.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's all I needed. Thanks.
Okay.
So yeah, so the second issue is them reducing the THC and stuff, and you know the thing about that is this is the proposition of idiots that know nothing of cannabis, know nothing of the cannabis user, know nothing of human nature, know nothing of drug policy, know nothing of drug use, addiction, abuse, the potential for abuse, diversion, or protecting kids from drugs, or keeping drugs out of schools, or helping people fight addiction, or creating products that would encourage people to divert from the black market and buy stuff under regulated markets. That's just an overview of the stuff they have no idea about. They've never heard about. They're idiots. And why they're idiots? Because they're going to go right back into the trench that they just got out of, and they'll play the whack-a-mole prohibition. And you know what? Cannabis consumers don't like THC. If you allow people to have an unlimited amount of THC, it's okay. It's absolutely fine. Why? Because people don't like THC. We've had THC in an unlimited amount in a pill called Marinol since the 1980s. And the DEA told the FDA, well, we're going to go ahead and downschedule that and make it more available because nobody uses it. Nobody likes it. We don't like pure THC. We don't like pure THC. Hey, idiots, drug warriors, we don't like THC. We only like cannabis. THC is part of cannabis.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes.
Go away, idiots. Go away.
Well,
how about that for my response?
I love that. It's one of the greatest rants I've ever heard, and I'm going to play it over and over again. But you know, it's but you know, when I was watching all the sessions here in New Mexico in February and March, we had a 60-day session, and then we passed it actually in a special session afterwards. But what just came out and jumped at me the most is that those people that you were just talking about, they're the ones that are making these laws, and they just, what you said just described what I watched for months and hours. They have no comprehension of what it is, yet they're the ones that are just putting stupid restrictions on this whole plant, which is the whole plant when it works together is the plant at its best. So
That's it.
So tell me about the adult use bill. Are they going to allow consumption lounges? Are they going to allow micro licenses? Will people be able to just get a medical business license to grow medical cannabis and have a medical dispensary? And we have that here. They're going to allow micro licenses at a reduced rate to keep dispensaries and growers into the medical field. So tell me about your bill.
All right. So we started legalization last year. They made it very clear that they wanted to legalize cannabis. We already had a decriminalization bill that had been in the works for 6 years, on the table, knocked down each legislature for 6 years. They passed that last year. So last year we got full decriminalization, actually a pretty good decrim, where it's like a $25 fine, a civil infraction to possess marijuana. True to their word, they studied marijuana legalization and regulation over the summer, did 2 big commissions and figured out how to do it right. All that was presented to the legislature. And again, true to their word, they put through a legalization bill and actually got one on the governor's desk. And amazing thing is the governor actually fought against his own, Democratic governor fought against his own Democratic controlled legislature, that they hadn't done enough to protect people's rights. They hadn't done enough to fight for equity. They hadn't done enough to really make this a real thing. And he said, we can't wait for 3 years for regulated markets before you're going to start doing the heavy lift of ending prohibition and fixing the damage done from this war on drugs. We need to make this go into effect now, July 1st. And we need to make sure we can grow at home and all this. And he actually sent it back to the legislature with changes. This is where it gets really amazing, right? The Senate voted 20-20, a tie vote, whether to accept the changes from the governor. And the chair had to step in and vote to break the tie. And we got legalization July 1st. But what that means is 3 years from now, they set up the regulated stores. There's going to be 3 years of legalization before we have our first store, 2 or 3 years. And in that time, we're going to be setting up a commission, an actual, this is great. This is a really great little piece of all the hundreds of hours of stuff going on in these committees. When they talked about doing like an ABC model, there was a pushback by the legislators. And they said the reason why they didn't was because that was a prohibition-based, kind of enforcement-based model, and they want an agriculture-based model, and they want a cannabis commission. So they set up in the law a cannabis commission that we're going to be establishing that's going to be setting up all these licenses and fighting out most of the things that you asked about will be sorted out in that cannabis commission.
What have they set the taxes in the bill, or are they going to set that in the regs?
It's going to be all part of that commission.
Okay. So, and see what else. So tell me about the home grow. Have they set how many plants yet, or is that also going to be by the commission? They're going to.
It's embarrassing. I think don't quote me on this, but I think it's 4 plants we're allowed.
Okay.
He played with it, went back and forth, and I'm not sure if it's 6 or 4, but I think it's 4. But again, that's a baby step. Hey, Virginia right now has decrim, but not for growing cannabis. If you grow cannabis in Virginia, we're still under a mandatory minimum 5-year felony for just a single plant. So being able to grow cannabis in your yard is going to have to be a learning curve for the police.
Will that start July 1st? Will they be able to grow July 1st? Yes. You're frozen, so I can't hear you. You're shaking your head.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Oh.
I was shaking my head and saying yes. So yeah, that was the biggest thing from the governor, that we actually have legalization. We're going to be expunging old records, and they're going to be changing the law on July 1st to allow you to possess and to cultivate your own marijuana in your backyard. God only knows where you get the seeds from. That's been really a cute part of this, is everybody asking where you get the seeds from. We're actually thinking of doing, and we're probably going to do, a seed giveaway, just like we did in DC. Washington, DC, we passed a legalization that was no profit legalization. So there were no stores to buy marijuana from legally up in DC if it's non-medical. But we handed out seeds so that people could grow their own and start that ball rolling.
What was the name of the gentleman? Adam? Was it Adam something? That was a big.
Adam Edinger?
Yeah. So I haven't heard anything about him lately. Does he still have a dispensary, or what's going on? He was a big advocate.
I just met with him.
Okay.
Yeah, I just met with him. Adam Edinger and Nicholas are kind of the key driving force of DCMJ. Mm-hmm. And also now we have the legalized nature, and the working on mushroom legislation and psilocybin legislation and stuff. They're at the center of all that up in DC. Yep.
What's the current status in DC? I know that there's a medical program that was allowed, and then it's also available for adult use, right? So
like I said, the adult use is a not-for-profit adult use. There's considerable amount of community support and not-for-profit distribution, sharing with others and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. It's really quite creative and very much unlike all the other states.
So when do you think? When do you think you'll be going to some of these events? Are you going to wait until the fall, or I know there's some events coming up for 420 and 710 and so forth. Do you feel comfortable going to events right now?
It's not a matter of whether I feel comfortable. Everything's shut down. I have a Patients Out of Time conference coming up at the end of May. That's going to be virtual, and that's one of those continuing medical education conferences. If anyone is out there needs CME credits, they can attend that. The 420 stuff will be all virtual. The next thing I think that I'll probably be at live will probably be March of 2022 back in Vienna. And we're already planning to have a big presence, a cannabis movement, to really be there strong at the United Nations next year.
Vienna waits for you.
I love it. I
Yep,
love it.
exactly.
Vienna's a neat place. I strongly advise people to check out Vienna if they want to as a tourist. But at the United Nations, you can get a tour if you call in advance.
So, what's next? I mean, for you, as far as fighting, are there any other conferences coming up, or is it pretty much the summer time now, and then there's not much going on, or you just have, or are there things all year long that you have to be involved in?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, I mean, it's just a rolling, there's no real summertime for me. It's just a rolling datelines,
When,
this coming year. Yeah, the stuff coming up in the fall is so heavy, and everything around us is so heavy. I mean, gosh, when I started working on the VA stuff, it was an esoteric project around pain contracts. And when I started working on the UN, it was all around just getting badges to get inside meetings to track what was going on. I honestly really didn't think we would be able to do this much stuff in our lifetime. The level of work that we've gotten accomplished, the amount of distance we've come as far as public opinion and everything is it's quite extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I thank you for filling us in. I think you said a lot of exciting things. Our country is moving forward. The world is moving forward with cannabis, thanks to people like you and your friends Kenzie and all those people that have been fighting for all these years. So I thank you on behalf of the public, for your hard work, and more than that, even your passion is like over the top, man. You're overflowing with passion, and that's really great to see. So thanks, Michael, and I hope to have you back when something big changes to explain it all to us, because it gets very confusing.
Watch the headlines. We'll see what happens when the UN law comes through. I look forward to updating you again.
Above the fold at the New York Times, I hope. We'll be right back.
I don't think
No?
if I do that twice in my life, that would be extraordinary. That's like getting hit by lightning, being involved with something. I got to tell you, quick, when you are involved with something on the front page of the New York Times, I don't care if it's above or below the fold, that level of attention will fundamentally change the issues you're working on. I mean, it's like the observer effect. It's mind blowing.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate your time today, and I love you, bro. We'll be right back.
Love you too, man.
We'll be right back after this. Thanks, Mike.
This is the Medical Marijuana Radio Show with Larry Love.
Well, I want to thank Michael Krawitz for telling us all about what's happening in the world of the freedom of cannabis. Also want to thank my two radio mentors, both whose initials HS. Thank you for your inspiration. And check out our new Facebook page, The Canna Channel. It's actually thecannachannel.com, but we're going to be publishing great videos and podcasts that we select specially at thecannachannel.com and on our Facebook page, The Canna Channel. We'll be back next week. Peace and love, everybody. Peace and love.